Well, welcome and good morning once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams from Survival Skills, and I'll be taking you through for the next 20 minutes or so with some of the latest news from around the biking world and some better biking tips too. So just to let you know what's on today's show. Late bit of news, bike jacker jailed after a Facebook appeal. We'll look at a FEMA study, which concludes that loud pipes do not save lives. Just run over the latest COVID-aware ride-out guidance very quickly. A piece of news of, I think, of real interest is that German drivers can now ride light motorcycles on a car license. And we'll also be looking at more on braking technique. That'll be the better biking tip at the end of the show. So sit yourselves down, grab yourself your brew, and don't forget, I'm online with this show every Wednesday and Sunday at 11. All right. Okay. So basically, let's crack on then. Now, we often hear an awful lot of negative stuff about social media. And, quite honestly, some of it is actually warranted. Facebook gets some bad press, but there's some, pretty awful stuff on Facebook. But social media can have some positive effects. And a 34-year-old bike jacker has just begun a 3-year and 4-month prison sentence after admitting the violent theft of a motorcycle in broad daylight in Atherton. He was caught because of an appeal for information that was placed on Facebook by the rider of the stolen machine. And what happened was this: Ryan Bibby was riding his KZ250 in September when he felt a knock on the back of the bike. Connell, and what apparently happened was that he turned round, he saw 3 people sitting in a silver Mercedes, all with face coverings on, following him. They rammed the bike again, and this time he fell off, and one of them made off with the motorcycle. The prosecutors were told that Bibby actually put out an appeal on Facebook for information about his motorcycle, and somebody put forward the Connor Hessel's name as the possibly being responsible for the robbery, and that ultimately led to his arrest and, as you heard, his sentencing. So some good positive stuff there about Facebook. Right, okay, now moving on. One of the old saws that you kind of hear quite a lot is that loud pipes save lives. I've always been fairly dubious about whether or not that's true, simply because when I'm driving a car, I often don't hear a motorcycle, even quite a loud motorcycle, until it's actually alongside me. It's certainly difficult, I think, to hear a motorcycle coming up from behind in the average car. I will admit that my old Nissan Serena was a bit louder than most, but even in the sort of reasonably well-insulated vehicle that my partner drives, when I'm in that, often I don't hear a bike coming up. So the European Federation of Motorcycle Associations, FEMA, have actually just released the results of a collaborative study which has been done. It involved the Romanian motorcyclist organisation, who are Moto ADN, the Polytechnica University of Bucharest, and the environmental consultancy company Enviro Consult. And basically what they did was they set up a controlled experiment to find out exactly how much of the sound being emitted by a motorcycle actually was likely to reach the driver in a car. And what they did was they set up two conditions. Now, firstly, what they needed to do was to measure the sound levels in the car to determine whether they were loud enough to be heard, but also, more importantly, whether they would attract attention above the background sounds within the car. They specified engine music and conversations and air current equivalent to when the car is driving over 60 kph. Now, I'll come back to that in a minute. But secondly, in order to have an effect, the sound of the motorcycle must be heard when the motorcycle is far enough away that the driver of the car has time to react to the presence of the motorcycle. Okay, now it's important to understand that the measurements used are on a decibel scale. And the FEMA article starts by pointing out that we need other levels of sound to give us some kind of a reference as to what decibel levels mean. And they actually say the normal noise levels we are surrounded by every day are in the range of 10 to 60 decibels. Now, first comment on that. The scale is logarithmic. So basically 40 decibels is not twice 20 decibels, is not twice as loud. Every 20 decibels, the sound level actually doubles. So in fact, 40 decibels is 4 times as loud as 20 decibels. And my second comment there is that the choice of those, that 10 to 60 range as normal sounds is a bit confusing. 10 decibels is actually the sound generated by normal breathing. So basically 10 decibels, although we can hear it, it's actually so low that we are very, very unlikely to be aware of that level of sound unless we actually consciously listen for it. 60 decibels, which they put at the upper end of their scale, actually falls within the level generated by background noises. Background music, for example, if it's sort of sitting in the background, that's going to be likely to be around 60 decibels. Or it could be something mechanical, a washing machine, an aircon unit, or a dishwasher going nearby would all produce around 60 decibels. So again, it's the kind of sound level that you can hear quite easily, but also kind of easily slips out of your consciousness. In fact, everyday sound levels do go quite a lot higher. Normal conversation, something like the level which I'm talking to you at the moment, would be around about 70 decibels. So put yourself into a typical office where several people are talking at the same time at various distances, and the ambient sort of level of sound is somewhat likely to be around 70 decibels. So that's a bit more than their background level. If you're in a restaurant, though, where it's noisy and you're struggling to be heard by it when you're talking, and that you're struggling to hear other people, that's likely to be as high as 80 or 90 decibels. So, okay, that gives you some framework on which to hang what I'm about to cover next. Where does the actual cabin of a car typically sit? Well, it's somewhere around 60 to 70 for a modern vehicle, 60 to 70 decibels at around about 100 kph, 60 miles per hour. So remember, if normal conversation is around about 70 decibels, if you're having to raise your voice to be heard over the noise of the engine and the road and the airflow over the vehicle, you're probably sitting in a cabin which is somewhere around about that 70 decibel limit. So to quote the article, the test consisted of comparing two data sets. One was the sound measured inside the car, generated by the operation of a motorcycle at high speed, and the second was the background sound in the car when the music is turned off or when the music is at a medium volume. Now, what's clear is that the car wasn't in motion. In fact, that's the experimental setup that you can see there. They have professional high-quality microphone recording from just behind the bike, about a meter high, just over a meter high, which is roughly equivalent to where the driver's ear would be. And what they did was they moved the bike into different positions and actually tried to find out how much sound was reaching the place where the driver would be sitting. Now, so the first thing to say there is the car isn't in motion, neither is the motorcycle, so they're measuring at fixed distances. So they do say they're simulating real situations. So there's an element of doubt about that. But anyway, to carry on, the report says that Moto ADN measured the sound in the car when the motorcycle was 15 meters and 10 meters behind it, but also when the motorcycle was in the driver's blind spot or when the motorcycle was in front of the car. So 4 different positions, in other words, moving from behind the car up to the front of it. Moto ADN also analysed the distribution of the sound emitted by the motorcycle in front and in the back at various speeds to measure how the influence of speed on noise and how it's distributed in front of the and behind the motorcycle changes. Well, okay, the thing there to say is that they didn't actually move, they were all fixed. So there's a slight issue there. But anyway, the third comment is that the lack of motion of the car will affect the sound level within the cabin. They mentioned wind noise, but one of the major contributors to noise inside the cabin of the car is actually road noise. It's what the tyres generate against the road surface, and that varies considerably depending on what kind of tyres you've got on the car. If you use something like a sort of mud and snows at speed, they are quite deafening. It also depends on the road surface. You'll undoubtedly notice that concrete surfaces are quite loud if you drive over a concrete surface. It depends on the width of the tyre. The fatter the tyre, the more noise they create. And it also depends quite significantly on whether the road is wet or dry. You only have to listen to the sort of swish of a tyre in the wet to know that. So anyway, without the motion-induced noise being measured, that's presumably why they turned up the radio. And I suspect what they did was they took figures from other studies of how much noise had been created inside the cabin of a vehicle and turned the radio up to the equivalent noise level. But it would be interesting to know if they had actually done their own tests on the vehicle themselves by driving it first. Anyway, to cut to the results, not one of the test bikes that they set up 15 meters behind the car could be heard inside the vehicle. And that includes the noisiest motorcycle, which produced over 110 decibels from the measurement 1 meter behind it, when that motorcycle was dropping a rev bomb, basically bouncing off the rev limiter. So that is an exhaust pipe which is A, highly legal, B, likely to get you booted off a track day, it's so loud. And 15 meters ahead in the car, that exhaust could not be heard. And the authors of the report actually suggested that the decibel level that would be needed at the tailpipe to be heard 15 meters ahead would in fact be in excess of 135 decibels. And again, to put that into a sort of a reference that is easy to understand, that's close to the level that a jet aircraft taking off nearby would create. So that's the first fact then. 15 meters ahead, you cannot hear even a loud illegal exhaust dropping a rev bomb. Now, by the time you drop the distance down to 10 meters, the motorcycle with the illegal exhaust could be detected by the microphone inside the car, but they put the sound that was being received inside the car through something called a frequency analyzer. And basically what that does is it measures the sound levels which are at different frequencies, the pitch of the sound, whether it's a low sound, whether it's a high sound. And what they found was that these exhausts, four-stroke exhaust, produces most of the sound at low frequencies. And that just happens to be the area within the human ear's frequency sensitivity, which is least effective. So, okay, but the legal exhausts were all still not heard at all. Put the bike up alongside the car, pretty much in the position that you can see there, where it's in the driver's blind spot adjacent to the rear wheel. And most of the bikes could actually be heard at this point. But what they said was, in fact, the motorcycle was too close for the driver to hear the bike and then take any appropriate action. So, for instance, if the bike's filtering and the driver's changing lane, it's already too late. The driver will not hear you. Okay, so what can I say about the experiment? Well, I think they could have improved it by actually recording the real noise levels inside the car by actually driving it and then replaying them into the cabin, so that basically reproducing the noise levels inside the vehicle before they tried to measure whether they could hear the motorcycle or not. But essentially, I think the validity of the study is probably fine. And overall, with the qualifications I've put in, I think that the overall conclusion of the study that loud pipes do not save lives is likely to be true. Okay, that's the FEMA study. Let me just put the link up for you. It is here. You will find it. Copy. There we go. That's the study, and if I put up the video link as well to their video conclusions, that should go up any moment now. It's just an error occurred. Okay, let's try that again. This is the video. Yeah, okay, so that's the video up, and this is the link to the actual article. I'll just try putting that up again. Don't know why that didn't go first time round. Let's see if it goes this time. There we go. Right, okay, so still to come. I've just got the COVID guidelines to run through briefly. And an interesting piece of news from Germany about license changes, which allows car drivers to ride light motorcycles. And if I've got time at the end, I'll cover the braking that I wanted to do. Right, okay, we've got some people to say hello to. Nigel, Jack, and Nick are all online. Thanks for looking in, guys. Good to see you. Right, okay, very quickly then, the latest guidelines on riding motorcycles have been circulated to biking groups and the biking press. I'll just run over very quickly the summary. Aside from permitted reasons, which includes rider training and essential journeys such as getting to work, riding to spend time outdoors and go to a place of recreations remains limited in all tiers. Okay, so it should be local. Now, these regulations apply to England. You can ride through a tier 2 and a tier 3 area if necessary as part of a longer journey, but if you're in tier 3, you should not ride out of it except for an entirely necessary and valid reason. That's stated to be to go into a place of work if you can't work from home, essential shopping, health, education, care, and other permitted reasons. Now, in tier 1, remember, you can meet up to 6 people inside whilst remaining socially distanced. But in all other tiers, you must not meet indoors with those who are not in your bubble. In tier 2, you must not meet with more than 6 people in a public open space whilst remaining socially distanced and adopting other measures, etc., etc. So basically, the riding advice is that in tiers 1 and 2, you can undertake group rides as long as there are no more than 6 people and that they are suitably short. And if all necessary COVID prevention security measures are in fact observed. So you need basically to plan your route and think about the risks of transmission at start, stop, and finish points. But this is the important bit. You should not start, pause, or finish in a tier 3 area. In addition, if you live in a tier 3 area, here's the bad news. I'm afraid you shouldn't try to go out of the tier 3 and join a ride that's starting in tier 1 or tier 2. In tier 3, there is a limit on meeting, and it's set at 2 persons. So they can either be from your own household or from a different household. So you could meet one other rider. So that's how rider training can still carry on, basically. Or you can take a partner on the back, but you can't do both. And now, where are you in terms of tiers? Well, there are maps available easily to find. Most of the tiers are imposed on a county-wide or a city-wide basis, so they're relatively easy to understand. There are a few exceptions, such as Slough, but do check before you ride. Okay, now, here's a really interesting thing. One of the things that riders tend to blame the EU for is the complex, time-consuming and expensive licensing system that we have in the UK. Hardly anyone realises that it was the UK that imposed that structure and that the EU directive actually allowed for a lot of flexibility. For example, the tiered tests that we currently have could have been replaced by one single test and some extra training. That was fully allowed for under the EU provisions, and the UK government has been saying for the last 10 years or so that they would review the 3-tier tests as they got more data. So far, that hasn't happened. But basically, the EU allowed flexibility, and it was the UK that chose to make everything as difficult as possible. So please do not blame the EU for the licensing situation that we suffer at the moment in the UK. I know riders find that hard to believe, but here's the proof. Motorcycle license legislation in Germany has been changed. Car drivers who have had their B license for at least 5 years, who are at least 25 years old, and who complete some theoretical and practical training lasting at least 13.5 hours can now ride a 125, an A1 motorcycle. No rider test for that motorcycle is necessary. And the only caveat to this specific A1 license permission is that you cannot ride that your motorcycle abroad or use that license to rent a motorcycle, for example. It applies only if you are riding within Germany. And not surprisingly, the initiative has proven to be pretty successful. According to information released by the Kraftfahrtbundesamt, which is the German Federal Motor Transport Authority, for the first 6 months of this year, no less than 27,000 B license holders, made up of just under 22,000 men and just under 5,000 women, have taken the opportunity to get an A1 license under the new rules. What's also very interesting is that the vast majority of those are not in the youngest age group, as you might expect. In fact, only 12% of those 27,000 are under 30. 40% are between 31 and 44, and a fairly astonishing 46% are between 45 and 60. So whether that's older, more mature car drivers scratching an itch that they've had to get back into biking for a long time, I don't know. Be interesting to find out. Or whether it's just people realizing that motorcycles are actually very convenient means of transport in the current situation, is a very interesting question. Now, Olaf Beethen, who's the chairman of the German motorcyclist organization called the BVDM. He says it's obviously necessary to take into account the needs and advantages of motorized two-wheelers in future planning. But it's interesting that the German authorities should have taken this step to make it much easier to get on a motorcycle. Total registrations of bikes in Germany were down overall 10% between January and May this year due to coronavirus issues. But on the other hand, light motorcycles were up 22% and light scooters up no less than 44%. And in May, the sales of light scooters more than doubled over the previous year. So the fact people are choosing scooters suggests that it's the more mature riders choosing deliberately to take a scooter to work. Now, skeptics will immediately say that allowing car drivers onto a motorcycle is a recipe for disaster, that the accident rates will shoot up. Right now, the statistics aren't there to say whether, in fact, there is any additional risk. But, frankly, the age profile and the need for sort of road experience as a car driver doesn't mean you're going to fully understand the issues of a motorcycle, but the training should help enormously. And these people are clearly making a considered choice to switch to riding a motorcycle. So I think that's a very, very interesting initiative. And it would be interesting to see what MAG and BMF make of that, and whether or not they will approach the UK government to see what they say. Right, okay, so don't forget I'm training again. I'm back on the road in terms of bike training. I'm currently working in the tier 1 and tier 2. Well, I'm not going to be working in tier 1 areas, they're miles away, but I am working in the tier 2 areas. Kent Sandy's in tier 3, and I'm not entirely convinced that taking a bike training course with me constitutes essential travel or essential education. So for the moment, my tier 2 training is closed off. I can't do Kent, but if you're anywhere else around London, Essex, Hertfordshire, Surrey, Buckinghamshire, then I'm happy to run a course for you. Don't forget the weather plays a part in training at this time of year. It's a fairly grey day at the moment outside. It is drying up a bit, and what I do is try to give you a weather guarantee so that you do get the best of the weather. And we start at 12 noon rather than normal 10 o'clock in the morning, and that gives the again, fog or rain a chance to dry up. So my courses are still available for those who want to come and do some bike training through the winter. Now, last point today is bike braking. Now, you may remember that I started on this topic last week, and I covered two issues. The first one basically was reading the manual. You probably got a motorcycle now, if it's a relatively new one, with an advanced braking system of some sort. 10, 15 years ago, most bikes had basic independent front and rear brakes, and that was it. But more and more motorcycles have even basic ABS on them, and the proportional ABS systems, which detect whether the bike's cornering, as well as different flavors of combined braking system, have all sort of taken over. So the thing is, I can't tell you what you've got. I can't experience what your bike will do without riding every possible bike. So answer is read the manual. You find out for yourself what your bike can do. The second thing I talked about last week was the sort of the old 75-25 front rear brake balance, which tends to be taught on basic training, and you'll also find it in roadcraft style books as well. It's fine on ordinary bikes, but it doesn't work too well on a lightweight step through where you'll be using far too much front brake and you'll lock it up. So again, that was something I talked about last week. But there are some other issues too, and here's something to think about. Think about stopping and actually bringing the bike to a complete standstill. If we apply more front brake than rear brake, and we hold that balance of braking right to a stop, I'll remember to put my little model out this morning. Remember what happens. The bike will dive on the front forks, the forks will compress, and the motorcycle will actually stop with the forks fully compressed, depending on how hard you brake, obviously. Now, what happens as soon as you come to a standstill? The weight transfer stops and the forks rebound. Now, if you happen to be just slightly off balance, with maybe you're braking into a junction at the end of the road in a corner, it's quite easy to lose your balance at that point. So I got very good at making smooth stops as a courier with only the front brake, but I have, in fact, dropped the bike. So there's a better alternative, and that's to use both brakes to slow down. Excuse me. So that the bike dives at the front as it would do normally. But what you do just before you actually bring the bike to a complete stop is that you ease off the front while the bike is still traveling. And then what happens is the bike comes back to a more level position as the bike stops. The forks have already rebounded and the bike stops much more level. You'll find it far easier to stop the bike smoothly using that technique. So you need to start your braking just a tad earlier, because you're not holding that front brake on right to the very end of your stop. But if you look at something like the giveaway lines drawn across the end of the road, and you look at the white line that's down the middle of the road, what you aim to do is get off that front brake about 3 straight lines before the giveaway lines cross the road in front of you. So it all involves a bit of timing. Get the brakes on a little earlier, front brake and rear brake together, hold both brakes together, but just 3 lines before you get to the giveaway marking or the stop line, ease the front brake off, and then the bike will come back to the level and you'll stop nice and level. If you are having trouble on left turns, particularly out of main roads, out of side roads rather, onto main roads, where you are often approaching on a curve, that is the way to avoid dropping the bike. Get the rear brake to do the work around the final couple of meters of the corner. Right, okay, that's it for today. Thanks again for looking in. Trust you've enjoyed the show. Don't forget, set a reminder, I'm back on Wednesday next week. And if you've enjoyed the show, do consider popping over to my coffee page. Right, before I choke to death again, thanks very much and catch you soon.